Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I'm stoked to talk about this conversation today. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of the billable hour, and I hold that torch, constantly harping and trying to get law firm owners to move away from that. That being said, the bulk of the industry is still there. If you're in litigation, if you're doing even transactional like family law, it becomes really difficult to go to a flat fee or subscription model or a value-based model. So you're stuck with hourly billing. And the hourly billing has a trap. And that trap is your psychology, the client and their psychology. So you want to bill as much as possible. They want you to bill as little as possible. What ends up happening in that billing cycle is you look at the time spent and first you say, well, maybe I shouldn't have spent this much time on it. So you start lowering how much you're going to bill to the client, if you're even tracking your time in the first place. Then the client gets the invoice and they look at it and they say, this is way more than I was expecting to pay. They call you screaming, and there's some sort of discounting that happens. I refer to a Clio Legal Trends report that was run in 2018 to highlight to firm owners the power of bringing on an attorney into the firm. But that Clio Legal Trends report surveyed 2,000 solos, and what it showed is that the average solo is doing 2.4 hours of billable work, but only realizing 1.6 hours. So that leakage or that loss is actually 33% of the active billable work that you're doing that you're not even turning around and collecting from your client, due to your own discounting, their forced discounting, and then simple lack of payment, right? Uncollectibles. So this is a big problem for law firms, and I'm sure our guest today is going to highlight how big this problem is and also what we can do about it. So I'm excited to bring on Saumya Banker. Saumya Banker is the CEO and co-founder of Donna AI, a time-to-cash platform for law firms. Before Donna, he spent 13 years in product leadership, most recently scaling Fig, a digital lender, from 0 to 400 million in loans issued. He founded Donna to help law firms increase revenue by reducing billing leakage, which sounds like exactly what we need to solve this problem. So, Saumya, welcome to the Profit with Law podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be here.
All right, awesome. So really appreciate you being here with us. We'll start with something really easy. People want to know who you are. Maybe they never heard of you. Maybe they did. Give us a little bit of the backstory. Fig sounds really interesting. How'd you get into that? And then that's quite the shift from a lending platform to serving law firms with saving the time that they're losing. So give us a little bit of that story of your journey and how you ended up here.
Yeah, most of my career has been actually in regulated spaces like financial services, and then I dabbled a little bit in beauty with my last startup as well. When we entered the legal space, we knew that we had a lot of competitive advantage coming from a security-first mindset, regulatory-first mindset, and making sure data privacy and all of that is top of mind when we're building this business from scratch. So there's actually quite a bit of overlap that people don't see between fintech and legal. And then the other aspect of legal is we noticed that most of the folks in the legal industry, most of the folks entering the legal tech space were actually entering it from like tackling the practice of law. And we realized that we are not lawyers we don't have legal background. So that's something we don't want to touch. We wanted to kind of take our expertise, which is finance and accounting, and apply that to the legal industry, which is why we're here to tackle kind of the business of law and tackle the billing aspect of legal and solve that for the law firms. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that in the near future.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I teed up a little bit of the problem that I'm aware of, but I'm sure that there's gaps in what I described, and I'm sure that you have more or better data than what I shared from a 2018 report of just looking at solos. So what is the problem in the industry that you're solving?
Yeah, the problem in the industry is billing leakage and revenue leakage. Like, you actually got the problem quite right. There hasn't been a lot of shift since 2018. But the shift does differ from law firm to law firm based on what their hygiene looks like and what each lawyer or timekeeper's hygiene looks like. So one of the things that we see quite often is that lawyers are going at the end of week or the end of month and trying to recollect what they did 3 weeks ago on the Tuesday afternoon before the bill gets sent out. And due to that, they actually miss about 10 to 30% of the work that they've done. The email that they responded to, the ad hoc phone call, the conversation they had in and out of court, all of that gets missed because nor is it on a calendar, nor is it actually documented anywhere. So it depends on a lawyer's hygiene, but a lot of that gets missed. And then to your point, when they do actually estimate that what work they did, it's actually the narratives that they write. They have to write narratives about what the work was for the bill. It's very high level, like worked on this form, but it doesn't really, and then you'll have that in like 5 line items over a course of 2 weeks. And people don't actually know what you did on a specific day. So a lot of times clients will ask the lawyer like, hey, can you actually describe what you did? The lawyer has no answer because they made it up themselves and they're going off memory. So that leads to a lot of discounting, and discounting on average is about 10% of the bills that you go out there. And then you send out the bill and then you forget about it. You work on the next client. Now, Big Law actually has like big accounting and billing teams where they're regularly following up with the client in order to get paid. But solos, small law, even mid-sized law, nobody owns that revenue problem. And so because of that, you send out a bill, but you kind of forget about it. And it sits in limbo and sits in float for on an average of 93 days. And so per lawyer, that's usually tens of thousands. And for a law firm, it's depending on the size, it's hundreds of thousands or millions that are always in float. So that's really the problem we're looking to solve. We're looking to make sure lawyers get paid for the time they worked. They can be answerable if a client actually asks questions about what did you exactly do. We have exact data of what you did. And then also go reach out to the client and make sure that they can pay us on time, whether it's through payment plans or some sort of commitment to pay.
So you shared a few places, right? So one of them is when we're actually going through the billing cycle and doing our own reduction, or not even remembering how much time we spent on something. You estimated that to be about 10% of the leakage there. Then you have the collection side of it. So what do you think is the biggest problem of the, in that scope, or what is the one that's easiest to solve?
Yeah, I always start with kind of starting at the top of the funnel because it's going to have trickle-down effects for the rest of it. So the top of the funnel, when you actually can tackle like capturing your billable time with accuracy, then it gives you a lot of confidence in order to speak to clients. And it also gives clients a much better view about what you did because you wrote it down then and there, and it's detailed. So a lot of our clients, for example, love the narratives that our system writes, and they find law firms have actually found this as like a marketing tool to attract more clients because they can actually get down to the granularity of what they did. So start with the top of the funnel and then make your way down.
So it's very interesting, and I want to go in 2 different directions here. So I'm going to just put a little bookmark in your narrative that you just talked about. I'd like to learn more about that. Yep. But when we're looking at the billing, the tracking of the time and having the confidence behind it, I feel like there's another piece there, and I'm going to lay out this question. You tell me if you have a solution to this. So when it's just me, right? So the solo law firm owner is tracking their time. They don't have confidence around it. Now we're tracking it accurately. We have a good narrative behind it. We feel confident. We share that with the client, right? But what I find is that typically what happens with a small firm is they bring on associates, and the firm owner will say, hey, I bill my rate of $500 an hour. My associate here is $350 an hour, and my associate's going to do most of the work, and I'm going to do a little bit of the work here. Then when they go through the billing cycle, they're actually looking at the time their associate put in, and they're providing their own input into whether that time was reasonable for what was done. So it's not a question of did they actually spend the time, but they start questioning whether this was actually the amount of time that should have been spent, forgetting that they're charging less for this person's time because they're not as efficient as them, right? So like they're looking at it from their lens, But the reality is we should be looking at it from the lens of the person who spent the time. And usually that time is not wasted. It's just that they're not as knowledgeable as we are. They don't have that level of experience. So they have to do more research. They have to, check their work more than we do. So it takes more time. But that's why we charge less for them. So we then end up discounting, and that discounting ends up bringing their hourly rate even lower in that process. But that's not a time tracking issue per se. It could be, right? But there are plenty of firms that are tracking time and are still discounting. And it's not that they're not confident that their employee spent that much time. It's just that they're bringing their own opinion as to whether that time should have been spent for that particular thing. So what is your take on that, and how do we solve that problem?
Yeah, I think to me, that sounds more of a training and performance review problem, right? So, yes, I totally hear you on it does take associates a little bit longer and they're getting charged a little, but there has to be a limit to that. So sometimes through our product, we've seen associates sometimes look for a file that's been not well organized for about 45 minutes. Now, during that time, the managing partner will a lot of times discount a large portion of that 45 minutes when they're looking for a file. And that's more of a training issue that I see. And then the reason they're discounting it is because they're putting that into operational/training costs and being mindful of that. But this data to how long it actually took versus how much billable hour moved forward actually helps the managing partner quite a bit when it comes to performance reviews and bonuses and pay cycles as well, in order to see how efficient their staff is, how they're doing versus how they were doing about 6 months ago. So I don't know. I think this is a very relative problem that each firm would need to figure out on their own, because at the same time, they're balancing getting billable hours, but also retention of the client if they're in a practice areas where they may get a recurring client or at least good word of mouth.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, because if you have good data around what was originally tracked versus what was actually invoiced, you can see if any associate is getting discounted before the bill goes out more than is expected or normal for your firm, for your staff. And that could be, to your point, that could highlight an opportunity for training, for increasing efficiency and getting them to do things better, so that we're not losing that. We're not losing that time, and we're able to bill more work from that particular attorney. So yeah, that's a really good point. Obviously, having a good system in place to track this and be able to run reports from is super important. And even today's practice management tools that have the ability to track time, I'm not sure that their reporting or that their analysis of comparing time that you tracked versus time that you billed is up to snuff, so to speak. So Saumya, so talk to me a little bit about, obviously you have a tool, right? Like there's a product that you have or have created that solves this. So specifically around this piece, does your tool solve the time tracking piece? Does it also, how does it deal with manual discounting of time and the reporting of that?
Yeah, so it does solve the time tracking piece. So what our tool is, it's a desktop application that lives on your desktop. You turn it on once and forget about it. What it will do is it will kind of capture all the time that you work on, understand what case it's related to, allocate it to that file, and then also write like narratives that we were speaking about earlier that could be client facing, that you can put directly on a bill about exactly what you did with good description. In terms of the discounting problem, so we are moving towards future billing and payment plans at the moment, but that's currently on the roadmap and not built out yet. But that is the goal of that. We do have really good reports about how everyone is tracking towards their projections, how each person in the firm is tracking on a case. As a managing partner or even a billing or accounting department, there's really good purview in real time about how much work is being spent on a case and how each associate or lawyer is actually working towards it. So that people find really valuable, and it's real time.
Now, from the way you described it, it sounds like you just turn the tool on and it kind of figures out on its own what you're working on, that you're actually working on a file, and it kind of watches what you're doing to write a narrative. So can you Talk to me a little bit more about that. Obviously there's AI in the name of your product, right? Donna AI, I think is what it's called, right? So it sounds to me like this is kind of figuring it out on its own. Can you clarify that for us? Is that true? And how exactly does that work? How does it determine, at least from the get-go, like what file am I working on?
Yeah, great question. So when someone gets onboarded, we integrate with their practice management system in order to capture all of their active clients and matters into our system. And then with that, we build context of each client and matter over time. So as you're doing work on a document, which may be like a Form 8 of a divorce case, for example, at that point, our AI will kind of build further context, like, okay, the case for Saumya is a divorce case. This is the jurisdiction of it. Here's the opposing parties. So we'll start building context over time. So as you continue doing your work throughout anything on your platform, whether it's email, whether it's a video meeting or anything of that, it will be able to find these common threads and be like, oh, this is they're talking to the opposing counsel of this meeting, so it's related to this file, etc. So there's a lot of deterministic rules and also like fine-tuned rules that get sent to an AI in order to actually determine that. Now, we're not saying we're perfect, but we do believe we're about 95% there, similar to, and we are able to capture a lot of all the missed time. But we do expect law firms and lawyers to be the last guardrail and check actually at the end of the work. So we don't kind of say that, hey, just send it off blindly. But other than that, it is all AI and all independent.
Okay, so talk to me. I got that. That's all great. Sounds fantastic, actually. Yeah. But what does the workflow look like for the attorney? So the attorney needs to review this and make sure that it got the right information, that this is actually the case I was working on, that this is actually what happened or accurately described what happened. What tools does the attorney have? So there's two questions here, and I'm going to layer them both on, and because I think you might have one answer for both. One question is how does the attorney check to see what was happening at that moment that it's billing? Because if it's like, hey, I don't remember working on this case, this doesn't sound right, and then I want to go into it and see what I was doing that it captured this time for this case when maybe it belongs to a different case. So how easy is it to be able to see that, find it, and adjust it? So that's part one to my question. Part two is, obviously the attorney needs to go back and review these entries. Is that on the billing cycle once a month? Is that a daily thing? What is the time commitment involved for the oversight and or the corrections that need to be made that now needs to change the workflow or the way that our attorneys operate?
Great question. So as I mentioned, it's a desktop application. So anytime throughout the day, they can just open a desktop and they can see what they've done throughout the day till now. They can go back for historical information yesterday, day before, last month as well. So that's just based on opening the application, and it's just in a view or like a timeline view of it. So in terms of like how often do they need to kind of review it / correct it, it really depends on them. But usually we see that lawyers are doing this prior to sending out a bill. So we give them the first draft, similar to how they would just generate a first draft, and then they review it. So it's a pre-bill process. They review it, and it's a same thing on the application, and it's a one-click send. So if they're integrated with our practice management system, they can review it and say, okay, one click, and it's sent off to their billing system or their practice management in order to generate the bill. Or they can export it into whatever format that they want if they want to send it off to another team member.
Okay, so interesting. So when they send it off to the practice management system, it now resides as a bill with time entries and descriptions entered to be sent out to the client, and whoever normally sends those invoices out or processes payments from trusts and stuff like that now can go ahead and execute on that.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. All right. I got it. Now let's go back to the narratives. You kind of glossed on it already in answering some of these other questions or describing some of these other things, but it sounds like your tool not only tracks the time, not only puts context around the time that it belonged to this case or this matter, but it also determines what you were doing and writes a narrative. What depth is that narrative? How is it determining that? And I mean, sometimes it's great for a client to know where the time was being spent, but sometimes less is more, right? Like sometimes you don't need to share as much as maybe perhaps is possible to share. And maybe you don't need a paragraph for every single time entry. So talk to me about how that works, how smart it is about when to go deep, when not to go deep, and how easy is it for you to update it, change it once it's been created.
Yeah, great question. So, originally, very candidly, we did go very deep. So we would say, hey, if for example a client is doing some research and drafting a document, that person, where we used to say something like, oh, they researched through these case laws. But to your point, we actually got feedback from our law firm clients mentioning that's a little bit too deep. So now we're kind of one level higher where we can identify that they did research in case law, but we won't specify what case law they researched. And we'll say, research case law and drafted this document. So it's detailed enough for like an end client to understand, but for a lawyer not to reveal all of their cards as well. In order to change any of what the descriptions should be, and a lot of times law firms have outside counsel guidelines and rules which they have to abide by. So we actually have like a rules section which you can type in kind of natural language about what rules you want the narratives to be. So you can say, hey, I want you to be more descriptive. I never want you to mention a person's name. Instead, mention things like client or opposing party or petitioner. So that's all done in real time through just kind of a rule module that we currently have. So it's very, very easy. And lawyers seem to love it so far.
So how much of this is rule-based and how much of it is AI generated? And you maybe they're one and the same for you, but to me, when I hear rules, I hear like static definitions, right? And when I hear AI, I hear dynamic adjustments as if it's a human going ahead and doing it, right? And so I guess first, am I right? Like that's the difference. And then second, how much of this is driven by rules? So how much input needs to go into it on the front end or as you go to make these rules possible versus the dynamic capabilities of AI where I'm really not doing any input. And then when I make changes, it sees the changes I make and then even makes it better the next time so that I don't need to continuing to make those changes over time. The best example I could think of is like, we have people who do bookkeeping, right? And they set rules in QuickBooks, like how, rules are they need to be changed every time something changes with a transaction. But if it was dynamic, we could just modify one transaction and it could say, hey, is this something you want to do moving forward? Great. And it rewrites the rule for you as opposed to you needing to go and say, oh yeah, there's a rule I got to go and change. So that's really the place of my question. Can you give us more context around how these rules work?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. And what I mean by that is we do have rules that help define it. And then those rules get kind of get shaped into a prompt, which goes to the LLM. So for example, in the narrative rules that I kind of mentioned earlier, if you don't want anyone's names to be mentioned, we have a prompt that kind of creates the narratives based on the evidence that has been seen on a customer's device, like how they're working on their device. Part of that prompt will tell the prompt, like, here's the rule you should follow when you're writing the narrative. Don't include first name, refer to each party as opposing party or petitioner or defendant. And then so that will go into the prompt. So the LLM will be the one who's actually coming out with the narrative, but then they'll follow the rules that we've set in. So it's a little bit of a hybrid approach in that manner. To your point about being more dynamic, it actually looking at what changes you've made and then can pick up from there. It does that too. So we do have like reinforcement learning in there where it's actually capturing all of the changes that somebody's making, and suggesting that, or actually just implementing that for that user going forward as well, as long as it's not contradicting another set rule that's been there in the first place.
Got it. Okay. So I want to switch to your tool. I think we've covered, you tell me if we've covered everything that we could. We talked about top of funnel. We talked about time management. We talked about client facing billing. Actually, we'll talk real quick. Let's just touch on what happens after. So the client receives the invoice. At that point, there sometimes happens to be a round of negotiations, or a client doesn't pay. Does your tool do anything about that other than providing better context and information to the client so that maybe it preempts them from making the call in the first place because of the level of detail that you have?
Exactly. That's the goal right now. So we try to preempt that and avoid that discounting in the first place, or that discounting ask in the first place. But as we continue building, because we're still early, we're less than a year old at the moment. But as we continue building on, that is the plan. We want to actually generate invoices and communicate with clients on various channels that they want to communicate on in order to answer any questions for them, and then actually get promises to pay. So whether that is through a set of payment plans, or whether that's just commitments and just timelines that we work with. And for those who don't pay, continuously, regularly follow up and treat this like a accounts receivable problem. That's also where there's a lot of transferable skills from my time at FIG as a lending organization to here, because accounts receivable is the same in kind of both. And this is something that kind of is untapped in the legal industry at the moment, because everyone's tackling the practice of law while we tackle kind of the business of it.
Yeah, makes sense. So regarding your product, is there anything else that it does, or you had mentioned some things are on the horizon as far as what you're going to be adding to it? What's your vision? I mean, right now it sounds like it's a advanced time tracker and a billing time description writer, right? Like that's what it sounds like the tool does today in its current form. What is the roadmap or vision for it as far as where you're going with that?
Yeah, so the roadmap is, from the minute you start working on a file, we want to get you paid for it, right? And that goes to all the accounts receivable piece that I spoke about. So not only do we want faster bill generation, we want less back and forths of negotiation of the bill, and then put them into a payment plan or get them promises to pay and actually collect that money. So the minute you worked on it, we want you to get collected as soon as possible. Right now, that is north of 3 months away, usually when you get paid for it, and with a lot of discounting. In terms of what we didn't speak about yet, some other ways that people are really using our tool that they absolutely love is they're using it for price analysis. So as you spoke at the very start of the introduction about the billable hour. So more and more firms are going away from billable hours. We don't think it's going to go away fully in the next foreseeable few years, because it's very hard to predict how long litigation is going to take and things like that. But more and more practice areas are going to move into a hybrid model and a fixed model. Now, our solution actually gives real-time data on how long a particular motion takes or case takes. And with that data, they can do pricing analysis and then price much better when they move towards their hybrid model and fixed rate model. So that's really where a lot of value add is also coming from.
Okay. Awesome. All right. This is really cool to learn about. And I love the dynamic part of it. Assuming it does what you've built it up to do, and that the descriptions are written really well and highly informative. I mean, that alone could be a real time saver. There's ways to work around stuff like that, but I can see the value. I also can see the value of the clients having visibility. And then finally, I can see the value of the billing cycle being shortened. I think small firms are making a big mistake when they're on the monthly billing cycle. There's no other professional services business that you're expected to do the work today and then only get paid a month later. Medical is different. The cash cycle is based on the insurance reimbursements, but you're still billing it the day that it happens, right? Like you're trying to shorten that cash cycle. So the moment that you meet with a patient, you're sending out that bill. And the really good practices are really good about turning those bills around quickly. So I guess the question around the billing cycle is how soon is too soon, right? Like if you're working actively on a client and you're working on it every day and they get an invoice every day, like is that disruptive to the relationship instead of beneficial? And I don't know the answers to these. I don't know if you guys have researched that to look at it. But I'm a big fan of shortening that cycle if we can. What have you found in relation to the actual frequency of billing or when you should generate bills out to a client?
So we find that 2 to 4 weeks is the right cadence of it. But one of the biggest issues that we see our customers face quite often is in various practice areas, they'll take a retainer from a client, but they have no idea when they significantly surpass that retainer. Because there is no signals and notifications or flags that come up because they're doing billing at the end of the month and they realize, oh, they actually surpassed that 3 weeks ago. Let me finalize this bill, get it out. And then there will be a lot of back and forth. And again, they don't get paid, but the work still needs to continue because the file is still moving ahead. So one of the things that we find is with this real-time information of how long it's going and kind of the integration with practice management systems, we a lot of times know when a retainer is going to run out, and we can notify the client right away or notify the lawyer right away in advance. So before it runs out, they can at least ask for a top up along the way, and they can generate a bill to kind of close out the loop as well, because that's the first question a client's going to ask, like, has my money run out? Like, can you explain me why?
Right.
That's where there's a lot of value add in something like our product as well. So you're not actually floating the client. The client still continues to float you in these retainer models.
Is that already there in the current version or that's coming?
Yeah, so in terms of our reporting aspect, that is currently there, where we are able to tell when somebody's approaching kind of the retainer limit or what their account in their trust account or the reserve account is coming up.
Is that something that is like an active thing? Like it recognizes I'm working on a client and it starts tracking the time, and then it pops up and says, hey, you only have an hour left of billing on this client?
It's not a pop-up notification at the moment, but it is in the reporting aspect. So you can see that, hey, yeah, you only have X amount of monetary money or X amount of hours left for this particular client. Yes.
Very interesting. Okay. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but fortunately, I think we got most of what we needed to cover in and really covered not just the problem and the challenge in the industry, but also the solution that your product brings to the table. And I'm sure that there are some people who want to learn more about it, maybe take it for a spin. So what does it look like to get started on it? And is there somewhere you want to send people, after hearing this conversation, if they want to learn more about it? And then the last thing is, if you can leave one parting piece of advice or wisdom for our audience, just from your own experience, on something that can improve their business, their life.
Yeah. You can find us on DonnaAnswers.com. In order to kind of try us out, we do have a 30-day money-back guarantee as well. It's very easy. It's less than 10 minutes of onboarding, and you can try us out with kind of zero risk as well. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search up Saumya Banker, and then you'll find me right there. Feel free to message me. In terms of the parting wisdom, I think there's a lot of trust that gets lost in this whole billing process. And then we hear that all the time. There's a lot of trust and there's a lot of anxiety as well. And the anxiety is also from both sides, the timekeeper, which is a lawyer, and also from the client, because they actually don't know what's happening on the other side as well. So one thing we see quite often is like somebody using a product like ours reduces that anxiety significantly because it requires no manual entry, just a check and like click in order to submit it. And it adds a lot of transparency and good rapport with the client, which leads to kind of a better relationship. And we hear that every day when we're speaking with our clients. So if you're ever trying to reduce your anxiety or increase your transparency in the company, come find us.
Awesome. Thank you, Saumya. Really appreciate you being here. Folks, we're here every single Thursday with a brand new interview or brand new episode on the Profit with Law podcast. If you're listening on audio, make sure you're subscribed to your podcast player. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube. You do that so that you get notified every time that we go live or every time we release a new episode. You also do that because it lets us know that you're listening. We want to know. We want to know that you're enjoying the show, that you're getting something out of it. Really appreciate you tuning in and listening to this. Hopefully this conversation was beneficial for you. And I just want to throw this one thing out there. We talked a lot about, hourly tracking for hourly billing, firms. But the reality is that if you're doing any flat fee subscription or any alternative fee model, I really think there's a ton of value in still tracking the time of your attorneys. And we tend to feel like it's not worth the effort for them to do manual time entries that interrupts their day throughout. And we kind of let it fall by the wayside because our billing is not tied to the time. However, efficiency is still a big issue. So I really think that a tool like this would be hugely impactful to firms who are not billing by the hour, because now you have something that can track what's happening with your attorneys and your paralegals, any billers that are working on files, and you can start to attribute how much time is going into it to check in on your pricing model, to check in on the profitability and also the efficiency, because there's no way for you to know that somebody's spending more time on something than they should unless you're tracking it. So I love this tool for the non-hourly billing firms to solve the problem of, I want my people to track their time, but I also don't want them to feel like I'm watching them every minute. I don't want them to feel like they need to they need to interrupt their work. And it becomes hard to make the case for them when it's not the revenue of the firm that's tied to it. So I think there's a huge opportunity here, even for alternative fee billing firms, to be able to get better insight into where that time is going. Thank you so much, Saumya, for being here. We will see you all next week on our next episode of the Profit Law Podcast. Have a nice day.